Axel Meierhoefer. Really enjoyed talking to Axel, but pilot for the Air Force in the U.S. He was also in the German Army. We talk about kind of the transition there and some of the differences between the two. But I enjoy talking to pilots because the structure, the checklists that are needed, how do they translate into civilian life? In Axel's case, he has Ideal Wealth Grower, which is an incubator, a mentor program that helps people to invest into real estate specifically. Residential real estate is where he's really, really good at. We talk about some of the statistics there. Going back to a pilot, though, by the way, I asked him, he flew the F-11s in the military, and just the force and the power. Talk about that a little bit, but then we transition over to some of the things he does now, how he helps people in just wealth management and creating portfolios, and the shift that he's made recently, a major shift that he's made. When I asked him if there's anything in the last month or so that he changed his mind on, but a really great conversation with Axel. I really enjoyed the time together, and great insight. Thanks for listening and watching. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz, and here's my 45-second introduction. After starting my business in the 90s, I started developing poor habits of eating in my diet because I was working way too much. Before you know it, I found myself 340 pounds. The doctor told me if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. Took the next 7 months, lost 130 pounds. People think there's some secret. Ask me, how'd you lose that weight? Like there's some secret. There is no secret. How'd I lose the weight? Just one word: discipline. I've had other successes in life, and I attribute them all to discipline. Now, I'm not the king of discipline, but I believe that it can help all of us. Friends, colleagues convinced me to start a podcast. The podcast mission: how do we better ourselves and society? I talk to interesting people in health, fitness, sport, wellness, business, technology, science, art, and culture. And I eventually ask them how discipline plays a role in their life. Podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Axel Meierhoefer. I believe that's how it's
Meierhoefer, yes.
Meierhoefer, yes. What has piloting, being a pilot for the Air Force, 22 years, I believe, what has that taught you about investment?
Well, one thing, and I don't know if that's just the aviation, but just the time in the military, one thing it tells you is discipline.
Mm.
Um, Another thing that it taught me, I have often said that is maybe a superpower, but it's kind of like almost inherent to the flying because you literally get to see it when you do it, is to develop a habit of looking at things with kind of like a 30,000 foot perspective,
Mm.
right? And in military aviation, you can go higher. You can do 40 or 50,000. The highest I ever was 59,000. So you can
Mm.
get a really big, when the curvature of the Earth starts showing.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, this whole big picture, like always trying to keep the big picture in view, when sometimes the minutia seems to be overwhelming or it seems to be taking up all your energy. That's definitely been a very big learning, and it's not so much a picture like you're looking at the picture, but what I'm getting at is in our mentoring, I oftentimes mentor people that I kind of colloquially call Henrys, high earning, not yet rich, right? So a lot of them come from like what would be called the typical W2, I have a job kind of an environment where they're serving some master, right? And this is maybe a little bit old language, but that's how I would describe it. And what I'm trying to help them to see from to adopt this 30, 40,000 foot view in the role of the master themselves, in the role of the owner of their business that hires, in this case, services, but they're not much different than employees, and that they have to learn to keep the big picture in mind and let these people, the banks, the property managers, the inspectors, the appraisers, the insurers, and whoever else you have, let them do their thing. That's what they're specializing in. Just like in a company, hopefully at least, the boss assumes that you know what you're doing, and every
Mm.
so often they want to know how it's going. but they're not supposed to. And I hope nobody works in that, where you basically being told every little thing in every little way, and everything that you do has to basically be approved.
In this fast-paced MSP landscape, how do you stay ahead? Introducing MSPinfluencer.com, your ultimate hub for MSP news, insights, and community connection powered by Forza Dash. More than 75,000 MSPs subscribe to our MSP Influencer Pulse weekly newsletter, staying informed and ahead of industry trends. Tune in to emerging podcasts from Joey Pinz and leading MSP voices, offering essential tips, powerful insights, and success stories. Explore our multi-authored blogs, crafted specifically for MSP leaders, delivering fresh perspectives and actionable strategies. Celebrate excellence with the industry-leading Forza MSP Influencer Awards, recognizing innovation, leadership, and impact in the MSP community. Join thousands of MSP professionals who trust MSPinfluencer.com to grow their business and expand their networks. MSPinfluencer.com, where today's MSP leaders connect, collaborate, and conquer, all powered by the Forza platform, helping MSP vendors work effectively with MSPs and helping MSPs grow. But I want to talk about aviation again for a moment, Axel, because I'm a private pilot. But I mean, how did you tell a story how you were actually you've got the bug and you wanted to fly, but you were actually talking to the Navy, but they said you must sail first, and they convinced you to go to the Air Force. How did you get the bug of aviation?
Well, I got the bug of aviation through all the senses, and this sounds probably a little bit weird, but it started out that my godfather and my uncle in the family uh, was an executive for Lufthansa. And one of the
German
things
airline.
yeah, exactly, largest German airline. But what they used to do at the time was that when you flew in an airliner, especially when it was business class or first class, they had something where you could, on what was called airline paper, you could write letters while you were flying. It was this super thin, very light paper, and you could finish and put it in an envelope and hand it to the stewardess, and they put a stamp on it and then delivered it basically where it needed to go. So one of the pieces of the bug was I got letters from him, like writing, I'm in the plane on the way to Johannesburg, I'm in the plane on the way to Rio, I'm in the plane on the way to Hong Kong, with a little bit of a story behind it in these kind of airline paper envelopes. Then every so often when there was like Christmas or so forth, that was also a thing at the time. The airlines actually gave out little metal die cast models of the planes. So every so often I got a little box with another model of the planes, and I had them all lined up, like in the order that I had received them from him. And then not even rare, more seldom, he came to visit the family in our flat in northern Germany. And even though nobody in the family smoked, he was smoking pipe. And so it wasn't just the kind of energy and aura that he kind of had from my perspective when he was there and telling about all the stuff he was doing in the world for his job and flying around, which was totally fascinating. But it was also when he was gone, the place still smelled like that pipe tobacco, right? Like for a while. So that's still in my sensory. Even today, when I'm talking about it, feels like I can still smell some of it. And then the last thing that was that my mom, and this is, you can tell, this is very long ago, but when I was really little and he had only visited a few times, every time an airliner with a contrail came by and we were outside, she'd say, "Oh, look, Uncle Gerd is up there," because she made me believe he's in every airliner, every plane, right? So if you take all these kind of sensory inputs together, that made me strongly desire to do that too. Only later did I find out that the pieces that were put together for me were not quite that way, but it created the bug, like you called it. Yeah.
And one of the things I appreciate is the structure of being a pilot. There's constant checklists, right? And you have to go over them. And, there's certain duties that each, the pilot in command has. And it's easily transferred into the business world to kind of have that structure and to have those checklists.
Yeah, I agree with that. Although I had to learn one thing over my both my military career and then after I retired in my second career, if you want to call it that. I nowadays call that the two sides of the same coin, where the one side is giving you all the mechanical attributes, which is what you just described. You have a checklist, you know exactly the steps to take to get ready, check the plane, get inside, get strapped in, to go through the starting checklist, check all the instruments, do your on and on and on, all those checks. I call that the mechanical component, and I would say pretty much anybody can learn it with enough time and money. We used to say you can teach a monkey how to fly because we had seen this stuff about the monkey with the Russians going into
Sure, into
space.
space. Yeah.
But here's the other side of that coin, and I have come to appreciate it more and more. And I would call it the artistic side, but not in the sense of you can paint something. I would be the worst person for that.
Hmm.
But there is a level beyond mastering the mechanics. So if you say you're a pilot, a personal pilot, when you have come to a particular airport and you have learned visually to identify the cues on the ground, where is the turn in point for the final turn descending down to the runway, and you can learn this, and depending on different weather and wind conditions and so forth, you can find out, okay, most of the time the wind comes from here and I have to kind of bank a little more or crab a little more this or keep the nose up a little longer and all that stuff. But what you're also learning is this adaptability to the circumstances. So if you then, after you've gotten through mastering the mechanics, decide you take yourself, the family, or whatever the circumstances to another place, the artist is to say my visual learning, my mechanical visual learning has allowed me to know where do I need to position my plane in relation to an unfamiliar runway, and what can I detect just from experience that allows me on the first try to find the turn-in point to fly an almost perfect descent while I'm descending, adjusting to all the things that partially I see on the instruments and partially that I feel in my pants,
Hmm.
right? Like flying by the seat of your pants, as it's called. So that anybody who wouldn't know would say, wow, how often have you been here? And the art is, I can do it even if I've never been there before.
Hmm.
That's different than just going through the motions. Right, and that combination is ultimately the level that I think is what we should strive for. And that last part, the artistic part, I would say some can get there, and it depends obviously what you're doing, right? Like flying being a three-dimensional thing. In flying, I have seen many times, I was an instructor for military jets. Some people had it in a way, right? They had this talent, I guess is one way to call it.
Hmm.
And some people, yes, they could get really, really good in the mechanics. But, and here comes where's this connection to business? They could get by as long as they were number two, three, four, or whatever in a formation or in a gaggle or in a larger um, effort. When you said, okay, now I want you to be the lead, that's different because now in the lead, and if you have ever done anything with formation flying or being in the lead, the thing is that the flying, the mechanics, and the mastery of the mechanics is assumed. You do this in your sleep, as the saying goes.
Hmm.
Why? Because as a leader, there are 27 things above and beyond the flying that you have to pay attention to, that you are responsible for. And that goes as far in like military aviation, if you look at any kind of like Top Gun stuff or so forth. If you, as the leader, do it wrong or you miss something, most likely everybody behind you that's depending and following your lead at least has a heightened likelihood of crashing.
Hmm.
Right? So that leadership role and having the capacity, the energy, the room, the mindset, the brain place, so to speak, to do the leadership while the other stuff also has to happen. And it can happen because you have not just mastered it, but you also got to a point where it's almost like second nature. That very much translates
Hmm.
to the business world, not just for leadership, but also for, do I actually have available capacity to take in new stuff without any deterioration of the existing stuff that we need to keep, we all know we need to keep going.
Hmm.
And that is a different level than just I know how to do it.
Hmm. Is the military, I mean, this is what you learn in piloting specific, but also in the military. Is the military a good place for many of us to spend time in?
Well, it depends a little bit what your ambitions are, I would say. If somebody wants, for example, to hone the skill where artistic freedom is very important to be successful,
Hmm.
then being pressed into a very disciplined environment is most likely going to be painful and has
Hmm.
probably questionable benefit.
Hmm.
If, on the other hand, you want to develop a foundation of important skills and capabilities from which you can then build into higher
Hmm.
levels. And this is also, if you really look at how the military, at least the Western, the German one that I started with, even though I finished in the US side, but there's a significant difference we can touch on. The German military,
Hmm.
you're working your way literally from the soldier level. The lowest rank in the Air Force was where I started. I had every rank all the way up to the level that I retired at. Partially because they wanted, obviously, for somebody who ultimately gets responsibility and authority to know how it is to be in those different levels. But it's also gradually allowing you to take on more and more and more and more, and not just in responsibility, but also in comprehension of what is this all about,
Hmm.
right? And from that perspective, I have never, and this is obviously a personal opinion, but I've studied this pretty intently over the last few decades. I have never been a very big fan of companies who bring somebody in into a top leadership role, sometimes even the CEO role, from another company that is not even in the same industry. Right?
Hmm.
I remember one example where Home Depot brought in a new guy as a CEO who previously worked in the automotive industry, stuff like that. And there's actually Good to Great is a great book by Jim Collins who is describing what makes these people that come in from sometimes other industry and other companies into these leadership roles successful initially is all they do is cost cutting. That makes them look good. Well, if you really think about it, that only takes you to about 3 years. Everybody and the Wall Street and everybody's going to say, "What a great guy! This Joey man, wow, he is like a home run. Look at how much the profits improved, and he made the place lean and slim and efficient and productive and awesome." And then by year four, everybody is okay. Somehow that trajectory ended.
Hmm.
Because now, sooner or later, you get to the skeleton and you can't cut any further, right?
Hmm.
So now you're at a skeleton crew and no innovation. All you did is basically cutting away what initially was called the fat. Most people cut a little too far, then they also cut away a little bit of the muscle that you actually
Hmm.
needed. Then on top of that comes people don't like that cutting operation without really a vision, so they leave. The best people always leave first. And then you get in the situation that you say, okay, now the person really have to show that they're a true leader, a true visionary, a true motivator, all those kind of things. And that's when they look for the next job,
Hmm.
right? So I think somebody who actually worked their way through some levels, I'm not saying they have to start in an apprentice level position, but to really have some thorough understanding or at least have worked in the same industry. And they can, if I had to interview them, articulate what have they learned that they think is transferable as an improvement for their next job. And that gives a good opportunity. But what you see, I mean, the most successful people that I see in modern industry nowadays are people who started relatively early in a company or were either even in the founding level. I mean, at least the ones who are most successful financially were all in the founding level. And you look at Tesla, you look at Facebook, you look at Google, you look at LinkedIn, you look at many, many, and you can say, well, those are technology growth companies, Palantir, right? Like a lot of the companies that we know by name and that are really top shelf, the people were there for a long time. And the skill, if you ask me, is the ability to attract top talent. And leading top talent is a different thing than just, and this comes back to what you asked me, Joey. It's not enough to hire people and give them a checklist, right? That's where the circle closes to flying. The best people in aviation are not the ones who can start the engine and get you from A to B. Right? And by the way, I'm sure you have experienced this. Aviation really separates the good from the great
Hmm.
when you get in the tricky situations, when the weather deteriorates, or when you suddenly have like crazy winds at your landing destination and barely enough fuel to go to the alternate, or those kind of things. That's where you find out
Yeah.
if you have what they call in the movie the right stuff.
Hmm.
Right?
You mentioned briefly there, Axel, the difference between the military in Germany and U.S. You've intrigued me.
Okay. Well, I have my theory. I am not claiming that I'm a military history expert, but my theory is if you have a military, and I think this has been proven throughout history, at the starting point where those who you determine to be the enemy or those who you want to impose your will over are much larger in numbers, much larger in resources, much larger in capabilities in general.
Hmm.
So if you're the smaller one and they are the bigger one, you have to have an approach to command and to leadership that is goal oriented, where you say, you are the battalion chief if you're with the army. Here's the thing that we need to accomplish. You have your capabilities, you have not just the checklist, you know to the artistic level your people and your team's capabilities, and you trust your next level people underneath you. Figure out a way to get from where we are to where we need to be. That's goal
Hmm.
orientation. In comparison, what I saw, and I actually am very proud that I was able to scratch a little bit on the surface of my first American Air Force or US Air Force assignment. Uh, it's a longer story. If you want to hear it, I can tell it. But fundamentally, there, I would call the system command and control and not goal orientation. And
Hmm.
command and control goes basically very similar to what you said about aviation and a checklist. It literally has a binder on a shelf for everything you can imagine.
Wow.
So if you want to do something, if you say, okay, we are flying into Baghdad and we want to get Saddam, and here's what we, or let's take the more recent thing, we want to actually get the nukes in Iran disabled, right? Every piece of that is in some binder,
Wow.
and the whole mission planning is also almost by checklist. And that can be, as we have seen, successful. And it works when you have overwhelming power, you have overwhelming sensory apparatus, so
Hmm.
that you can evaluate, in this concrete example, what are the air defense capabilities of the Iranians.
Hmm.
And without necessarily going through mainstream media, there's probably a reason why the Israelis went there first. Yes, they said what they did, but in reality, if you ask me as a military aviation guy, they basically helped to minimize the air defense threat.
Wow.
Then you go with your B2s and say, I don't want to risk a $2 billion piece of equipment or multiple of those if the air defenses could actually detect them early enough and do something. A B2 is not very movable, as you may know if you ever looked at one. They're good to fly over stadiums at NFL games, but when it comes to air defense, not the greatest thing, right? So
Right.
so that's one thing. The difference from a German perspective, if you have to operate goal oriented, you don't even have a piece of equipment that costs $2 billion most of the
Hmm.
time. And if you do, you have maybe one or two, right? So the approach has to be, how can we do with our limited assets and with our limited manpower similar things to achieve the same goal, right? They may have decided that a missile attack would have been more prudent because it doesn't risk man or
Hmm.
manpower. They may have decided, okay, we are better off to do drone warfare because it doesn't risk manpower, even if we have to send 10 times as many drones on the same spot until we hammered like a little woodpecker into the bunkers, right? One after the next, after the next, after the
Sure.
next. This is, by the way, what we used to do in previous wars until we had these bunker busting laser guided weapons. We just kept hammering the same spot until it kind of gave in. Um, or they may have even gone as far as saying, okay, can we infiltrate and do like more of a CIA, like the what was the guy, Osama bin Laden kind of thing? Like
Ah.
secret helicopter, secret SEAL team, secret, like we just blowing the place up and people would only read about it, right? Because that is more feasible than sending $12 billion worth of airplanes to drop
Hmm.
a bunch of GPUs. So, there's a difference. What's also interesting to finish
Hmm.
this little sequence is I was getting to my assignment base to start flying F-111s for the US Air Force just after, like literally 2 months after they came back from the first Iraq war.
Hmm.
That particular unit, that wing with all the squadrons. And so I had a great opportunity to compare and ask, okay, so how was it? What was like the flying over there in the desert and what did you learn and stuff? You know what they said the first thing that happened?
What's that?
The base commander said, leave the binders behind.
Wow.
That doesn't mean that they all went rogue, but they were very clear in such a dynamic environment to try to do everything by the book or by the binder. And to their credit, not one F 111 was ever lost in combat. Not one.
Wow.
Not in Iraq, not in Libya, nowhere. Yes, a few crashed for mechanical reasons and stuff like that. I don't want to make the statement that I know for a fact that if they had flown by the book, that would have happened. But if you can say, okay, you have gone, and I want to always bring it back to the two-sided coin. Yes,
Hmm.
our people that we take into combat, they know all the mechanics, that side of the coin, blind. But they have also reached a level of artistic mastery in their aviation, both in the sense of what they do with their plane, but also who they're flying with in multiple, like F-111s and F-16s and F-15s and air defense and what have you, with um, army troops on the ground advancing, all that kind of theater type thing.
Hmm.
And we know who we need to make the lead. And here comes the important part where this ultimately becomes similar to what the Germans do versus the US Air Force. When the brown stuff hit the fan, or kind of like similar to that, they
Yeah.
decided we need to allow people to have some intuition, some creativity in theater, in scenario. And we all know the end result. It's not just that they found the guy hiding in a hole, but if you look
Hmm.
at it militarily, they pretty much kicked the stuff
Yeah.
out of these
Yeah.
guys, right? And the reason I believe is why if you cannot conduct warfare on that scale with multiple nations and everything participating, if you slavishly listen to the checklist.
Hmm.
And again, I want to just close on that. That doesn't mean that you disregard the checklist. The
Right.
checklist is the mechanics. You have to know the mechanics and the art form and then bring both to the table to get the best result, right? And if you go to Eastern stuff, right? If you don't forget the military for a moment and say, okay, why are there 75, 80-year sushi chefs or wood carvers in Japan that everybody is crawling on their knees bleeding to get a chance to learn from them? because they went on this artistic level of mastery to an extent with 50 years of experience
Mm.
that only if you're also willing to spend that many years do you even have a chance to get there. That kind of mastery is the thing. Now I know we can't all apply this everywhere,
Right.
but I'm just mentioning this to say where is this applicable, right? And if you look at the most successful people, one of the distinctions is who can hire the better team. And as we all saw on the media the other day, just throwing money at them is not always the successful
Mm,
thing, right?
mm, mm.
Zuckerberg tried to buy somebody basically and didn't work. It's also interesting if you want to take it to industry, right? Like people ask Elon Musk, why did you start X.AI? And he said, because they are absolutely top talent who don't want to work in a 120,000 people company.
Mm.
They want equity, not just a good job that's interesting. So you start a new company and offer them equity. It's a pretty good deal when you start with like a $100 million initial valuation and they are now at 180 billion. And they're
Not a
only
bad gig. Smart people over there,
not
that's for
yeah,
sure.
I think they're 2 years old or something.
Yeah. One last question about aviation. Can you describe the power axle in an F-11? What does that feel like being in one of those?
How does it feel like? Well, one thing that I can say is the F-111 engines were so amazing that while you were, let's just give you, and I know if you've never done it, it's hard to imagine, but let's say you're flying around at 8 miles a minute, just to put this in perspective, and you decide for whatever reason you need to get the hell out of where you're in scenario right now. If you take the throttle all the way to the wall, as it's called, all the way
Yeah.
full afterburner, it literally hits you in the back at
Wow.
already going 8 miles a minute. That's 480 knots. You're already doing that. You're hitting the afterburner. It literally kicks you. It's kind of like an electric car, like a Tesla. When
Mm.
you hit like ludicrous mode at full power, it kicks you in the back. That's what an F-111 does when you're already going 480 knots.
Wow.
Um, Now, the thing is, I had the very great fortune. I don't think it's allowed anymore, but when I first gotten through all my training in the German Air Force, we were still allowed to fly 100-foot low level. We actually literally went to Canada to train for that. And that is the only thing that I can say that gives you a true appreciation of speed.
Mm. Because you're close, so close to the ground, you can measure the ground speed. Airspeed and ground speed is very different.
Yes, but the thing is more if you go in Canada, we went between 8 and 10 miles a minute. But when I'm saying this, and you basically compare it and you say you can be on a highway, you're making 1 mile a minute. Human brains are not very good to say how much is 8 times or 10 times as much,
Right.
right? But what I learned when you asked me earlier, what did I learn from aviation? This still with me, not so much for business. But when you ever in your life went 8, 9, 10 miles a minute, very close to the ground, you learn that you're looking way further ahead.
Mm.
So when I translate this to normal life, I've always liked sporty cars. Like I've had BMWs forever. And I've had it many, 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 many times where people were with me in the passenger seat. And first, I don't hear much from them. And then at some point, they say, "Hey, can you slow down a little bit?" And when I say, "Why?" and they say, "I'm here and I'm looking and I find it scary." And I'm like, okay, you don't know that I'm seeing the 12 things that are happening there half a
Mm.
mile ahead because I'm so used to it, right? When they're looking like to the next car right in front of them, you learn to anticipate way further on the timeline and it translates to everything, right? Like when you're living in an environment, even if you go way slower, your brain is still having like the equivalent of looking 10 miles ahead or as far as you can see because obviously there are obstacles. It's not all like water where you can just fly and there's nothing in the way. if you like go to Canada and fly over the tundra, there are trees and there are mountains and rocks and all kinds of stuff. 100 feet is not that much if you think about
Hmm.
it, right?
Hmm.
And so that was the time when I could really see, okay, I had once, they call it become a pedestrian in our aviation, at least we call it that. Yeah, because I was flying and came back, taxied back to the parking position, and then you connect the plane with the ground crew, and they said, "Sir, are you aware that you brought back a Christmas tree?" And I'm like, "No." "What do you mean?" And they said, "Well, when you come out, we show you." So we shut everything down, get out of the plane, and the plane has what's called ailerons. It's basically, like at the end, at the
Flaps.
back of the plane. Yeah, not flaps. It's basically the steering surfaces at the back of the plane. And there's a gap between the body of the plane and those ailerons. And I had about an arm thick upper part of a tree sticking like literally in there.
Wow.
And the guy says to me, "I think we can call ourselves lucky that this plane is fly by wire, because I didn't feel any difference when I was flying it,
Amazing.
but it had basically compensated that the one aileron couldn't quite move as much because there was a Christmas tree sticking."
Wow. And
So
you didn't feel
then,
any drag. It's
yeah, my
amazing.
squadron commander said, "Okay, you obviously flew lower than you should have, so give me your driver's license, or actually your aviator's license." So for 1 week, I became a pedestrian
Wow.
because as punishment for bringing Christmas trees home. But they actually, we call them jumping trees, because you fly and every tree is like 30 feet, 40 feet, maybe 50 feet. So you can see them. It looks like one big mass.
Sure.
And then there's one of those gray, no leaves, no needles, no nothing things sticking
Mm.
up. It looks exactly the same color as the background sky.
Uh,
That's when you collect the Christmas tree. You
I
literally
see. You couldn't see it.
now normally the plane is so powerful it just cuts it off and done, right?
Right.
But in this case, it must have hit just the right way so that it's
Mm.
stuck there. You know, yeah, it looked pretty funny. The pictures, internally, the pictures were shown around this Axel Meierhoefer, this guy that brings like Christmas trees from, while flying and stuff. The plane looked funny too with this thing sticking.
Mm.
So,
Axel, why is real estate such a sound investment?
what is, in my opinion, is, well, residential real estate. We should be a little more specific.
Ah,
Residential real estate is because it has so many different income sources that you don't typically find in other investments.
how so?
Well, my organization is called Ideal Wealth Grower, and the word ideal is also an abbreviation. So the first thing that it has as real estate is income from rent. Right? The second thing, in an indirect way, is income from depreciation. Basically, you're paying lower taxes than you would if you didn't own the real estate.
Hmm.
The next thing is it has equity, which is a combination, number one, of what you put in as a down payment, but it's also when your tenants pay you, then that payment typically goes into the mortgage. And even if you just started, most mortgages go down by about $1,000 a year in the first few years. So that $1,000 is added to your down payment in a way. So that's equity. Um, then you have appreciation. That's just the market saying, okay, the value of the property went up, or I like to say the purchasing power of your money went down. So you need more of it to get the same thing. Because funny enough, I always describe it that way. The real estate is no different. Square footage is the same. House is the same. Garden is the same. So what's really gone down is purchasing power, which means you need more dollars to get the same thing. So that's appreciation. And then the third thing is leverage, where I always say, people, show me the other investment where I only need to put 20% and somebody else gives 80% and I get to keep 100% of the profit. You show me, I'm there. So far, I'm still waiting.
Hmm. And you talk a lot about only using 20% of your money. How did you
Yeah.
arrive there, Axel?
Why? Because in investment real estate, if you want to buy, let's say, a 3 bedroom, 2 bath house in Memphis, Tennessee for, let's say, a $200,000, all you need to do is put $40,000 down, and the other $160,000 comes from a lender. And let's say this $200,000 house increased in value by 3%, right? So that's $6,000. While they don't say we want 80% and you get 20%, you can keep the whole $6,000.
Hmm.
Now, on your $20,000, what would you say? Is that a good return?
Pretty
On your
good.
40,000, sorry, I'm 40,000. That's 15%, dear Joe. 15% just on the
Hmm.
depreciation or inflation or whatever you want to call it. And most people say, "Oh, real estate is not a good investment; only goes up by 3 or 4%." I say, "I take that any day. That gives me
Hmm.
15% right there, and it doesn't even include any rent, any tax depreciation, anything. I get 15% just like that, doing nothing." Now you show me any index, even the S&P 500, where every year after year after year after year I get consistently 15%, and then there's more. There is icing, and then there's cherries on the icing. We haven't
Hmm.
even added that yet. So I oftentimes say you have to really have a bad year if you can't get to 20%.
Hey, Joey Pinz here. Want to take your podcast experience to the next level? I'm excited to invite you to become a YouTube member. It's the absolute best way to support the channel and enhance your connection. Join our amazing community and unlock the incredible perks, custom loyalty badges, exclusive emojis, and priority comment replies. Your voice will always stand out. Be the first to watch new videos with early access, receive special membership shoutouts, and get exclusive behind the scenes photos and updates. Dive into content available only to our members, special videos, deep dives, and insider perspectives. Engage directly with me. Suggest podcast topics you want to hear, and even get personalized video shoutouts. Hit the join button right now and become part of something special. Let's build this amazing community together. I can't wait to welcome you as a new member. Join the Joey Pinz family today.
Wow. That's very attractive. You also talk about turnkey investing.
Right,
I've always heard turnkey is you just turn the key and everything works. You don't need to do anything else.
right.
Uh, why is that wise? Because it seems like there's a lot of stuff you have to take care of, and it's expensive. Why is that a wise area to focus on?
Um, well, before I answer that, can I ask you where you live?
I'm in Tampa Bay.
Okay. Tampa Bay is, I would say, maybe medium expensive area to live,
Yeah, it's
right?
getting too expensive, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm in San Diego, so that is definitely an
Mm,
expensive area to
mm,
live. To answer this, I want to give your audience a little bit of like an appreciation in how this kind of works or what philosophy is connected to that. And then I get to the turnkey. I believe in the real estate game, especially in the residential real estate game, one of the first questions you can ask yourself, who is the winner in a deal in general, not on great price, not so great price, but in more general terms. So let's take my area in San Diego, normal 3 bedroom, 2 bath house with a tiny little bit of garden, single family home. You're looking at about 700, $800,000.
jeez.
If we apply what we typically apply just to say, is it worth my time to even evaluate a property? We try to be as close as possible to the 1% rule, which basically means you want to get about 1% of your purchase price in rent. Let's say we found this house for
Hmm.
$700,000. 1% would mean I would have to find a tenant that pays me $7,000. Now let's go back to our Memphis house. 3 bedroom, 2 bath, same square footage, little bit of garden around it, but I get it for 200,000. And again, I asked myself, can I find somebody who's paying 1,900, 1,950, 2,000? Why is that important? Obviously, I don't find anybody in San Diego who's going to pay me $7,000 in rent for a
Right.
little normal house. So what are they paying? If I'm lucky, maybe 4,000, 4,500. If you look at it like who wins in this deal, with the 4,000, 4,500, you have negative cash flow for sure.
Hmm. Hmm.
And nowadays, even worse because interest rates are high. But even when interest rates were low when I started, it still didn't pan out. So in that case, I would say the tenant wins because
Hmm.
they get a $700,000 house for $4,000 to live in.
Hmm.
In Memphis, the person gets a $200,000 house for, let's say, $2,000 rent, and I have positive cash flow from day one, even at 7 or 8% interest.
Hmm.
So I win. Obviously, what do we want to do? We want to find properties where we win as investors, not because we don't like our tenants, but why would you get into something where you have to go into your own money every month just to pay for everything? That's not a smart investment, right? That would be like a margin call every month on your stock investment if you were to
Hmm.
compare. So now the question is, okay, I live in San Diego. How the freak am I getting a house in Memphis and get it organized and get it, so forth? So now we're at turnkey. Like, so what do we do at Idea Wealth Grower? We have relationships with good turnkey providers, and a good turnkey provider is defined by having a minimum of three pillars. Pillar number one, they find good properties. I always say the ugly duckling in a good neighborhood.
Hmm.
They buy it for as low as they can and then renovate it to the modern standard, new plumbing, new electric, new kitchen, new bathroom, everything, um, better siding, no lead in siding, roof, whatever it takes. So that's one department. The second department is basically the same thing like a real estate agency. The team that actually offers the properties that are about finished or already finished to two groups of people, either companies like mine who have an existing relationship where either I or my clients would go in and buy a property directly from them, which is nice because then we don't have to pay any real estate agent or brokerage fees. Or if they can, for whatever reason, find anybody, then they put it in the MLS open market, Zillow, what have you. So that's kind of like the real estate department, the typical agency department. And the third department, the same company, that's the important thing, is property management.
Hmm.
So now what happens is, for one, if Joey and Axel want to go to this turnkey provider in Memphis and they say, "Hey, you send us this expose of this 3 bedroom, 2 bath house, 200,000, freshly renovated. We are interested, but we have some conditions. Number one, we assume that you do high quality work. Is that right?" Most of the time, I've not really had one time where they said, "No, no, we do shitty
Oh,
work." They
no.
always claim that,
Yes.
okay. I said, so you do high quality work, then so you don't mind if we send our own inspector. And if our inspector has anything that is critical, safety related or otherwise, I'm sure you will be fixing that, right? Yes. Number two, you just said your construction team is really good. Are they proud of their work? I said, yeah, absolutely. Awesome team. Okay, cool. Then they don't worry to give us a warranty for the first year that anything that they touch during renovation, they're going to fix if it breaks. Absolutely. Right. So now property management goes and gets the tenants in, and the tenants try all the new stuff, obviously, and whatever wasn't done quite so awesome, even if the inspector didn't have any problem, we just basically say, hey, remember the warranty that we have here? Send your people. Now, obviously, that's not really the true scenario most of the time. The true scenario is because the contracting department knows that the property management department is going to get angry with them. They constantly have to nag them because they didn't do a good job. The quality rises.
Hmm.
And for us as investors, especially for the clients who just start with this journey, it's good to know that if the tenants find something for the first year, it's going to be covered. So that also means, and this is a little bit into the idea wealth grower philosophy, we obviously, especially when we first start, we want to build a reserve. I always recommend initially when you're in the first 3 or 4 houses, first one, two, three, 4 houses, take about 15% of the rent income and put it into reserve until you reach what I call your pivot point number. So mine is about 25,000, but I have 10 properties. Other people say mine is 15,000 or 20,000. It's just some amount of money. So if there's a bad storm and the roof flies away and you don't want to fight with the insurance company, you just say, here, take 5 grand, 6 grand, 8 grand, fix the roof.
Hmm.
But you don't want to do this forever, right? And it helps, obviously, when you're just starting the first year, you don't have to worry about any kind of repair. So you can literally take the 15% and start building the reserve without really any fear. So those are the differences to going to an agent, finding a property, buying the property, going through closing, and then having to find out who is going to be my Memphis property manager. Because guess what? If the flipper fixed your house, the agency sold it to you, property management puts a tenant in, and the tenant says, every time I open the sink, the faucet in the kitchen, it leaks like crazy all over the place. Guess who is going to pay for that?
Hmm.
That's you as the owner, because the flipper is gone. You bought it as is. The agency, the real estate agency, is not going to take any responsibility. And property management says, well, the tenant has a right to get it fixed. You can't have a kitchen faucet and sink that doesn't work. So we have to go in and then get you one of these awesome $275 per visit plumbers to fix a leaking faucet. So I much rather work with a turnkey provider who might be slightly more expensive initially, even
Interesting.
though they also have to basically make it so that their appraised value for the property is what they're asking. Because if the appraisal is significantly lower than what they're asking, no lender is going to give you the money and we wouldn't buy it.
Hmm.
So they know that too, and they're working in their industry, in their community. They have a pretty good idea, if they're doing it on a larger scale, how expensive can the house get. So the
Hmm.
difference between the flipper and the turnkey provider is not that huge, but the massive, massive benefit is I spend for my 10 unit and 10 house portfolio about an hour and a half per month to manage it. If you had to board it regular from an agency and you had a direct relationship with property management, every little time something happens, you don't have to do it, but you have to approve it, you have to review it, you have to fight whether it's really your fault or the tenant's fault and all that stuff. You don't have that with turnkey providers.
You sold me, Axel. That's I didn't realize that was available. It's a really good it's a really good way of doing that. You have the ideal wealth grower. You've got the podcast with many, many episodes. You're really good at it. You have fun with that. What do you want the viewers and listeners to come away with when they watch your podcast?
Well, for one, I always wanted it to be still wanted to be educational, because the podcast has a couple of episodes, what I call the solo episodes, where I'm talking about the
Mm,
market or something that I discovered and so forth. Then once a week, there's also an interview like what you and I are doing here, where I bring in guests. And I'm always hoping that people can widen their horizon of all the different things that are available, either in real estate or in money or insurance or all those kind of things that are kind of part of that bouquet of services that you, as the king of your kingdom, so to speak, or your empire, as I call it, that you
mm.
should be aware of. Um, so that's that part. Now, we are starting on August 8th, we are starting season 5. And one thing that I'm going to focus on is the impact and the future of AI, both in investing in real estate, but also for our lives and for our economy. So I already secured like 6 really amazing guests that are more in that direction, because I want our audience and anybody in your audience, if they're interested, obviously, to kind of start thinking. And the title that we gave for season 5 is The Age of Abundance.
Hmm.
And what does it really mean? And I go back to one thing we touched on earlier, Joey. I mentioned that it's very hard, if you drive and familiar with driving with your car on the highway with 60 miles an hour, to imagine how it would be if it were basically 1 mile an hour, um, and 1 mile a minute, how it would be if it were 8 or 10 miles a minute.
Mm.
Because our brains are very bad at exponentials. The same thing, I believe, is true in what's happening with AI and AGI and humanoid robotics and stuff like that. We are okay when all these companies say, oh, we have now version 5 of ChatGPT, and then the Grok guys come out and say, we have Grok 4 and it's better than anybody. And then the Anthropic guys come out and say, Claude is better than all of them. And then the Chinese say, and we did DeepSeek number 5 and for 10% percent of the money that you guys spent. That's all okay when we hear that. If you step back for a second and say, when they talk about the improvement in capability, they're not talking about 10% more. They're talking three times, four times, times better since
Mm,
last year or since 6 months ago. So I personally believe
Amazing.
this wave is a little bit like a tsunami that is, just still over there in Russia. And we heard about it. We saw in the news over the internet that it happened, but it hasn't gotten to our shore yet, at least not in our minds. And I am hoping that with that new season, we can help people who have some interest in it start thinking about. I'm not claiming that I have any solutions to offer, at least not yet. But I think it's important when you start thinking about something, you start making up your own mind of what is important to you, what to pay attention to, and so forth. And there are many, I can give you one or two interesting questions. Let's just take some of the experts who claim that when labor basically is free because of all the humanoid robots, and we would all get UBI, universal basic income, I, as a owner of multiple properties, I'm asking myself, will the tenant pay the rent out of UBI or am I going to get the rent from the government?
mm,
And if I had the choice, I would want it from the government, not as Section 8, but I think it's still going to be safer than depending on the tenant to give it to me rather than just spending it on stuff. Right? So, and will there still be evictions if there's no alternative for these people to go to in that kind of an environment? Or you can ask yourself, how will it look like when the whole neighborhood is getting inundated by these humanoid robots to do all the landscape?
mm.
They are coming, mowing the lawns and cutting the hedges and stuff like that. And you're just sitting by the pool and you say, yep, nice. Life is nice when it doesn't cost anything for all this work to get done. And oh, by the way, my guy is just doing the laundry and cleaning the toilets.
Hmm. We're
So
not that far from that. That's for sure. Axel, has there been anything in recent history in the last month or so that you've changed your mind on?
maybe not in the last month, but one thing that I'm looking at is, every so often you have a birthday. Obviously, we all do.
Yes, hopefully.
Um, yes, exactly. Well, I'm optimistic. There will be a few more to come. But what I realized is when I first started my portfolio of investment assets, I looked predominantly at the performance. And I always, and this is maybe a little bit of a flaw coming from Europe because the stuff that's being built there is basically built for hundreds of years unless there's
Mm,
a war. Right? You can go visit all kinds of nice places that are 500 years old. I know that that is not one to one translatable to the way stuff is constructed in the US, but still, I think a normal house that gets proper maintenance can easily get to 100 years, no problem. Right? So, on the other hand, it is undeniable, especially in a stick built house, that the older it gets, the more things start popping up that are not necessarily the standard things like a faucet leaking or so forth. Right? So, one of the things most recently that I'm thinking about, would it make sense as you get older to use the 1031 exchange feature that the government still has, even though it's been called dead many times, it's always surviving, to switch from an older portfolio to more of a build to rent or relatively new portfolio. And I did research literally, what is it, about 9, 10 days ago. Where's the point when a brand new property starts to getting discounted in value because it's not quite brand new anymore? And my research showed somewhere between years 5 and 10. It's not really because it's different in location and blah blah blah, but fundamentally, a house that is 7, 8, 9 years old, you can say it's not a new or compare same price to a brand new one that just came on the market. So I'm literally and actively not decided yet, but I'm thinking
hmm,
about slowly changing my portfolio from my existing older houses to these not quite brand new, but relatively new houses. Partially to say, then whoever inherits my portfolio or the family trust will still not have to bother. If I make it another 30 years, then they have another, like, what, 50 years left in them. Um, but it's also a matter of, the older the existing portfolio gets, the more you have these kind of more quirky type of repairs that you have to do. And not to have those, and especially as we're getting closer and closer to paying off the mortgages, you really can use the portfolio as your retirement income.
Mm.
Almost all of it. You pay maybe 20% for all the expenses on insurance, property tax, property management, that stuff, but 75 to 80% of the rent goes in your pocket, which also means you don't really need 10. I'm thinking, am I going to maybe convert my 10 properties into five relatively new ones?
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, so that's one more recent thing. Um, and I would say to your audience, if you're not already in your 60s, don't worry about it. But when you're getting there, you might want to start thinking those kind
Mm.
of thoughts.
Hmm. So, Axel, I started my business, computer, IT firm back in the '90s. I was in my 20s, and I was working way too hard and not paying attention to to myself, to my personal health, and eating pizza and drinking. So, and so I'm in front of the doctor. She tells me I'm at 340 pounds. So I had gained all of this terrible weight. And she says, if you don't lose this weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate. So, my daughter was just born, scared the life out of me. I'm driving home, really upset with myself. I can abuse me all I want, but I've got this family now. So I spent the next 6, 7 months, lost about 120 pounds, kept it off. And, when I tell people this, they always say, what's your secret? I say, there's no secret. Discipline. You alluded to it when we
Right.
first talked. Focus, willpower, routine. How does discipline play a role in your life, Axel?
Well, I never had that much weight, but I had a bad habit of smoking.
Ah,
And I would call my story a little bit more like a reinforcement of a decision. So, first step in that process was that I didn't necessarily make the decision, but we had a custom built house at the golf course next to the base that we were stationed at. And my wife said, just so you're clear, there is no smoking in this house.
hmm.
And it wasn't that big a deal because as long as the weather was good, going out to the patio and have a smoke, okay. But then when it got colder and colder and I had to basically put on a coat, that wasn't so great. So she at one point said, so how much longer are you going to do this?
Hmm.
And, a little bit macho that I was at the time, I said, honey, I make a New Year's resolution. January 1st, I don't even remember which year it was, I'm going to quit. And she, like, yeah, right. So that actually motivated me initially. So I basically thought, how am I going to pull this off? And that was the time when these patches, these nicotine patches, were
Oh, yeah.
on vogue. So I looked. There was not really much internet. So I went to the pharmacy and asked them how this works, and they said, "Well, you have this one that has a pretty high dosage, and then a little less, and a little less, and then you can let it go." Okay, so I bought three packages, one for each, and then uh, my base commander wanted me to go to Washington to negotiate on something that was related to the flight operations that we were doing. So I'm happy. I'm putting everything up, going with an airliner to Washington, unpacked my suitcase, and I had packed like I always did, no patches. So the second macho thing was to say, okay, this is only 5 days. I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna make it. Every time I had the urge, and I was super busy, so it was a little easier.
Cold
Okay,
turkey.
cold turkey basically after like a week. I told her on Christmas, and like 2 weeks later was January 1st. And then I fly back and I see my boxes sitting there. And my wife says, "Oh, how was it?" And I said, "Oh, I was so stupid. I forgot the patches. So I really struggled through it. And she said, "Remember, no smoking in the house." I said, "No, no, I don't need to smoke. I'm just going to take a patch. And I slap it on. About 30 minutes later, she said, "What the heck is going on?" I'm like, "I don't know." I was like vibrating, sweating, red like a pig.
Whoa.
Basically a nicotine overdose.
Huh.
Because for 1 week, not
Right.
smoking at all, and then you're putting the biggest, highest dose patch on,
Uh,
gave me such a rush, and it almost made me puke.
huh.
So I said, okay, I guess I can do it without these patches. And then I went back to the pharmacy and said, hey, I have 2.5 boxes left. They said, no returns.
Ah.
So yeah, I had planned to go through 3 months of patches and stuff, and it took me basically 2 weeks. And the reinforcement, I started that story with saying, in my case, it was a reinforcement story. I never want to ever feel as I felt with that patch on, ever again.
Want to show your love for discipline, inspiration, and the Joey Pinz podcast? Now's your chance. Introducing the brand new Joey Pinz merch store, where style meets discipline. Choose from premium apparel, cozy hoodies, stylish hats, durable bags, and your new favorite coffee mug, all featuring the iconic Joey Pinz logo. Perfect for podcast fans, discipline enthusiasts, or as unique gifts for friends and family. Every purchase supports the Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations podcast, helping us continue to inspire greatness and promote positive change. Visit joeypins.com/store today and wear your discipline proudly. Joey Pinz merch. Wear it, share it, and live it.
Good for you. You have a mission, Axel, of helping others help themselves become successful. So if I ask you what motivates you personally or business wide, is it related to that mission?
Yes, absolutely. And I oftentimes feel like I'm a little bit put in a box because people know that we're talking about real estate, helping people to invest in real estate. And what I oftentimes say in this mentoring, and I mentioned briefly here and there, that I want to get people to see themselves as the king or queen of the empire.
Hmm.
That's for me a more important component of them becoming successful than how big the portfolio is or how well the money has been placed or stuff. Yes, that's also important. But there's really a transformation of the person, the way he or she thinks, the way he or she shows up, the level of confidence he or she has, the way they see the world, the way they are developing the ability to say, okay, I can do almost everything and I can also start helping others. This transformation from a almost total dependency, either by rules or by job or by all kinds of other things that make it like when people say red race or they're running in a little wheel, to having an idea of what independence really means.
Hmm.
And I found it doesn't automatically mean you have to have your own business, but if you have at least your own company for the purpose of investing, it gives you a glimpse. And if our investing and the way we help is successful in and of itself, then you get to what I call the time freedom point, where you can literally say, my investments are paying enough, so I have the freedom to do with my time what I want and don't have to exchange it for money anymore.
Hmm. So given that as a motivation, how do you measure success, Axel?
Well, one way to measure is the calls or the WhatsApp messages or the emails. I like calls the best. I'm old fashioned. When somebody calls me and says, can you believe it? I just literally went through the closing. I own an investment property now. And oftentimes, even almost like under tears, telling me, hey man, I have to tell you, I never thought I could get there.
Hmm.
That is one of what I call one of those aha moments.
Hmm.
And they're intoxicating and motivating for both parties. I feel like I have measurable success, and it's more the emotional energy that they expel rather than the fact that some signature ended up on a piece of paper. But they do too, because every single time they go through a closing or every single time they're taking a next step on the way to their time freedom point, the belief that they can do it, whatever their limiting beliefs were before, is getting stronger and stronger and stronger.
Hmm.
That's also why I oftentimes say in our mentoring program, the most intense phase is in the beginning, first 3 months, where it's really like almost carrying, if not, ideally hand holding. the longer the program goes, you can literally see, especially when you buy more than one property in that first year, how the confidence is increasing, how the whole attitude is increasing. And that also means they don't need me every week, or like 3 emails a day and 5 WhatsApp messages and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Because as the belief grows, it also includes to say, well, let me try this on my own. I don't always want to be dependent on Axel to help me with everything, right? But it's good to know when I tell them, well, if you want to try it, feel free, but always know if they don't treat you like the king or the queen that you are, let me know and we call them together.
Hmm.
And that just knowing that that's there has made a huge difference, right? There are people that actually told me that they went into their bank to negotiate a mortgage, and afterwards the banker said, "What happened to you?"
Hmm.
You're a totally different person, and that's because they basically gained a certain level of understanding. That's why I try to infuse in this mindset component for people to see a bank is like an employee working for your empire. The insurance people are like employees that work for your empire. And guess what? If the bank is giving you the brown stuff, fire them. There are thousands of them out there. You need to make them understand that they are applying for the privilege of working for you,
Yeah.
not the other way around.
That is the way to look at it. Most certainly. It's a business
Well, that's what we
transaction.
do. Joey,
Yeah.
that's what we do with our jobs. We go and say, hey, Mr. Boss, I have these skills. Do you want these skills? If you want these skills, you got to give me this amount of money.
Right.
What's different with the bank? The bank comes to you and say, we have this thing. If you want this thing, you hire us and then you give us a certain amount of money. They just call it interest.
I certainly do. Axel, I really enjoy our time together. I know we had to push this off, but I love the insight and what you do, the transition from military and pilot over to this area is really, really exciting. And you do such a great job, especially with the podcast. Anybody watching or listening, how can they get in touch with you?
But the easiest is just to put ideal wealth grower either into Google or put it directly into search engine or whatever, and you will find our website or all the other stuff on all the different social media. And then if you go to the website in the top right hand corner, there's a button that says book a call or complimentary call. My web guy always changes it a little bit. But the point is, this kind of stuff that I do, and I hope the audience was able to get that through our conversation, it's a pretty personal thing, and we need to be on a good frequency. We need to kind of align with what we want to accomplish and need to find out if we like each other. And if that's the case, then we decide, okay, then also let's work together.
Hmm. Idealwealthgrower.com. We'll make sure to put it in the show notes. Axel, thank you so much. Next time I'm in that San Diego area, maybe we'll go get a cup of tea.
Yeah, or coffee or ice cream or something like that.
Make it worth it. Yes. You be well. Auf Wiedersehen.
Thank you, Joey.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.